Imagine having celebrated your whole life something. That actually never happened. Every December 25th, millions of people believe they are remembering the birth of Jesus. But what if I told you that the Bible never mentions that date? What if all of this was a tradition built on a big lie? This video isn't attacking faith or looking for cheap controversy. What you're about to see is an unfiltered look at what the biblical texts actually say, what history hides, and how pieces connect that almost no one dares to put together. Hold on, because this not only changes how you see Christmas, it changes what you thought you were celebrating. Let's go straight to the point. Who decided that Jesus was born on December 25th? Because the Bible doesn't say. In fact, it doesn't even give a specific date. So where did this idea come from? The answer will surprise you, and it has more to do with politics and paganism than with religion. Let's go back to the Roman Empire. In the centuries before Christianity, December 25th was already a special date. It celebrated the birth of the god Sol Invictus, a solar deity worshipped by the Romans. It was the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, when the sun is said to be reborn and the days begin to grow longer. A festival symbolizing light, rebirth, and it coincided perfectly with beliefs that early Christianity was beginning to spread. And it wasn't the only celebration. There were also the Saturnalia, from December 17th to 23rd. During those days, the Roman people celebrated with gifts, feasts, games, and freedom for all, even for slaves. Sound familiar? Exactly. Many Christmas traditions, gift-giving, lights, special foods, come directly from there, not from any biblical verse. Then came Constantine, the Roman emperor who legalized Christianity in the 4th century. And what did he do? He mixed, he fused, he adapted. To unify the empire under a single religion, he took popular pagan festivals and renamed them, including the December 25th one. It wasn't a divine revelation. It was a brilliant political strategy. A master move to get pagans to accept Christianity without giving up what they already loved celebrating. And you know what? It worked. It was so effective that even today we keep repeating that date, as if it were a historical fact. But it isn't. In reality, for the first centuries of Christianity, no one celebrated Christmas. Early Christians were far more focused on the death and resurrection of Jesus, events central to their faith. The idea of commemorating his birth appeared centuries later, when the church had power and needed to create a common narrative, something that would unite everyone under a shared religious calendar. What's more, some of the earliest theologians and Christian leaders didn't even agree with celebrating Jesus' birth. Origen, for example, considered it inappropriate to celebrate the birthday of a divine being, something that only pagans did for their emperors and gods. Even the choice of December 25th was debated. Some Christians thought Jesus was born in March, others in April, others in September. Hippolytus of Rome proposed April 2nd. Clement of Alexandria also rejected the idea of December. But over time, cultural and political pressure won out, and December became the standard. And what was happening in the Northern Hemisphere at the same time? Cold, snow, and winter celebrations everywhere. Nordic cultures also celebrated the winter solstice. Yule, for example, was a Scandinavian festival that included decorated trees, bonfires, and symbols of rebirth. Sound like the Christmas tree? It didn't come from Bethlehem. It came from pre-Christian traditions that were absorbed. Here's a detail few people know. The first documented mention of December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth appears in a Roman calendar from the year 354, known as the Chronography of 354. This isn't a biblical text, nor inspired, nor prophetic. It's simply a Roman administrative record, like a government almanac. Does that sound like a reliable source for establishing such an important date? Many would say no. And in the following centuries, Eastern churches, like the Armenian Church, continued celebrating Jesus' birth on other dates, such as January 6th. It was not a unanimous or global decision. Christmas as we know it was imposed, not revealed. And yet, despite all this, most people still believe that date is official. Because when a lie is repeated for centuries, it ends up sounding like truth. But you are no longer part of that group. Now then, let's move on to what the Bible actually says. Let's read it without filters. Now that we know December 25th was more of a political decision than a spiritual one, it's time to look at what the Bible actually says. Can we really find clues about when Jesus was born? The answer is yes. There's no specific date, but there are revealing details that many overlook. Let's begin with the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. It says there were shepherds keeping watch over their flocks at night in the fields near Bethlehem. Hold up for a second. In December, in that region, the weather is cold and rainy. Does it make sense for shepherds to be outdoors in the middle of winter? Many scholars agree it doesn't. The custom was to graze in spring and summer, not in the dead of winter. Another interesting detail comes if we follow the trail of the priest Zechariah, father of John the Baptist. According to Luke 1, Zechariah belonged to the division of Abijah, one of the priestly turns of service in the temple. These turns were organized by weeks, and historians have estimated when each group served. If we calculate from when Zechariah served in the temple to John's birth, and then add 6 more months to Jesus' birth, we land on a possible date, between September and October. Yes, you read that right. Autumn, not winter. Everything lines up with Jewish feasts of that period, like the Feast of Tabernacles. Some believe that Jesus being born during those festivities would have deep symbolic meaning. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. There are also theories that place it in spring, based on other cultural references and climate conditions. But the important thing is this: no clue points to December, not one. Another interesting passage is in Matthew 2, when the wise men from the east arrived to see Jesus. He was no longer a newborn in a manger, but a child living in a house. Herod, not knowing the exact birth date, ordered all boys 2 years old and under to be killed. That suggests Jesus was already several months, even over a year old, which completely busts the typical Christmas Eve image we've been sold. The Bible also never mentions decorated trees, gifts exchanged between people, or special dinners. All of that was added centuries later. There's nothing wrong with celebrating it now, but let's not confuse tradition with the sacred text. And why isn't this taught in churches? Because it's uncomfortable. Because it breaks the sweet and commercial image that has been built around Christmas. But you're here because you want the truth, not the wrapping paper. When you read the Gospels carefully, you realize the authors weren't interested in marking a specific date. They were interested in showing a message, who Jesus was, not when he was born. Tradition tried to fill that gap, and it filled it with whatever was at hand. Another overlooked detail is the use of seasons in the biblical accounts. The Bible is symbolic with time, and when it mentions angels appearing, outdoor life, and the movement of many people due to tax registrations or pilgrimages, it doesn't fit well with the cold, wet December weather. In that climate, roads were dangerous and travel was avoided. Luke 2 mentions Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem by order of Caesar Augustus. Some historians argue that a census would hardly be organized in midwinter. The empire's logistics depended on favorable weather, so it most likely took place in milder months. Nobody would move an entire population in extreme cold. If we continue calculating from Zechariah's temple service, a logical timeline emerges. Assuming Zechariah served in June and his wife conceived soon after, John the Baptist would be born in March. Jesus, conceived 6 months later, would be born between September and October, pointing again to autumn. Some also link Jesus' birth to the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah in the Hebrew calendar, which falls between September and October. Significant, because that feast symbolizes the announcement of a king. And the best part, none of this requires conspiracies or wild theories. You just need to read closely and ask good questions. We already saw winter doesn't fit. We saw Luke's account points to shepherds in fields. The priestly service suggests John's birth in March, leading to Jesus' birth in autumn. So what happens during that time? Jewish people celebrate important feasts: Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets; Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement; and Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles. These celebrations are rich in prophetic symbolism, and it gets fascinating. Sukkot, for example, commemorates God dwelling with his people in the desert. The Gospel of John says, "The Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Coincidence? Maybe. But the symbolism is striking. Many theologians believe Jesus was born during Sukkot. Some place the date between September 25th and 30th, around 5 or 6 BC, based on astronomical calculations and historical records of Herod's reign. But wait, before Christ? Yes. Due to calendar errors made centuries later, it's estimated Jesus was born between 6 and 4 BC, before year 1. It sounds odd, but that's what the evidence suggests. Back to the weather. September in Israel is warm, ideal for travel. Families went to Jerusalem for the feasts, and Bethlehem, nearby, would have been crowded. This also explains why there was no room at the inn. Thousands were in town for the same reason. Now add this. The angels announced good news to the shepherds. Sukkot is known as a time of joy. The parallel is remarkable. Other studies look to the astronomical alignment described in Matthew. The star the wise men followed could match a planetary conjunction that occurred in September of 7 BC. Several astronomers support this theory. So what do we have? A clear window, mid-September to early October. Not exact, but much closer to reality than December 25th. And this isn't just a trivia fact, it changes perspective. Because celebrating Jesus' birth shouldn't depend on an imposed date. It should be about understanding meaning. Knowing when he was really born isn't just a historical detail. It connects you with the core message of his arrival. And if you've made it this far, here's something worth saying. Understanding this doesn't make you less faithful. On the contrary, it makes you a seeker of truth. It's not about tearing down Christmas. It's about recognizing that many things we think are sacred were built centuries later for reasons unrelated to the spiritual. Understanding the true context also connects you better to history, to first-century Jewish culture, and to the real impact of Jesus' arrival. It's not just a pretty story for a Christmas card. It's an event that changed the world. If this video helped you see something you'd never considered, I invite you to do 2 simple things. First, subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell. Here, we don't just make content to entertain, we open conversations most people avoid. Second, share this video with someone who also needs to hear this. Someone who might have celebrated their whole life something that never happened the way they were told. And if you still have doubts, that's okay. You're not alone. Asking questions, researching, and thinking for yourself isn't rebellion, it's responsibility. Thanks for getting this far. Thanks for questioning. And thanks for wanting understanding. See you in the next video.